Hi all. Okay, so this is a video discussing the similarities and differences between In Cardigan Market and a peasant. Okay, I'm gonna try and keep it under 10 minutes because there was some feedback that Emily gave. So a shout out to Emily. So thank you, Emily, for that. To just try and keep it a little bit more succinct. Okay, so a little bit more to the point, perhaps. But please try and use those videos beforehand to make sure if you haven't got it already in the way you're approaching analysis of the poems that they're really thorough. Okay, your analysis is really thorough. It goes into detail. It shows an appreciation for the different interpretations of the poem, different points of view you could have. In other words, that it shows that you can drill down to the different layers of meaning, that you can zoom in on particular words and phrases and discuss their effect or the intended meaning you think from the writer or the poet. Okay. Just to show that really that you can go into detail and really just explain your thinking process in really crystal clear sort of detail, how you sort of come to different inferences and different judgments about the poem. Okay, let's get into it then. So we're going to use AMP as you've been sort of trained to do, talking about what the poems are about, their messages, the different moods and similar moods, words and phrases, and personal response. However, I'm actually not going to talk about in any real depth or detail, or maybe even at all, words and phrases and personal response. I'll sort of weave that into some of the talk about message and mood. Basically, what I'm just trying to do now is give you a reminder of how to compare and contrast, or in other words, talk about the similarity and differences of two poems, and a way to sort of just approach and handle these sort of links. Okay, let's get straight into it. I'm going to talk about first. So, firstly, it doesn't really matter if you start with In Cardigan Market or a peasant. Go with which one you feel more confident with, and you can sort of go between the two at your own sort of leisure, really. Because if you find something thinking, oh, do you know what, that's something I could actually say, which is a similarity, put it in. Okay, it doesn't have to be from where we've discussed, and when we're really trained up with the sentence openers. You don't have to stick to that pattern all the time. You can see an opportunity to move away from it. Move away from it. That is just like a safety net for you. Okay, so about what is In Cardigan Market about? Okay, it's about a strong character, isn't it? Auntie Jane Fish. She's a very strong character. She really stands out in the way that her voice cuts through the market din like a saw on a nail. She's got this quite authority, isn't she? This almost grating, irritating, but difficult to ignore voice really sounds out and draws attention to her. So she stands out. She stands out in terms of because she's calling for trade, isn't she? She's selling, she's advertising her wares, her product, her fish, and bringing and sort of drawing people, trying to persuade them to come to her stall, to her fishmongers. The thing about the Reese strikes us just from her name, Auntie Jane Fish, is that she lives almost for a job. She's like wedded to her job, like she's almost married to her job. Her job is who she is. Now, that's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because I think we see that with a peasant. And this is the point where I would use the connective similarly, or in a similar way. Iago, his daily life is tied around and tied up with what he does, that he lives and breathes living on these Welsh hills as a hill farmer, in terms of looking after his flock of sheep. He lives and breathes his job. Now, this is where I push it a bit further. I want to explain how that's the case. Why does he live and breathe his job? Remember the 5 W's. Why? I don't have to say multiple whys. I mean, whys. It might just be just the one. So why does he live and breathe his job? Well, because he's so isolated from any other contact with anyone or anything else. Think about it. If you were sort of isolated away from other human contact, you'd have no fresh ideas coming in to you. You just have your own thoughts, and that's quite restricting, really, isn't it? And quite limiting. So this is the point where I'd say, okay, you've got this common thing. They both live for their job, yeah. But is there a difference between how their lives are sort of wrapped up with their job? And this is where I would use like a connective, like however, for Auntie Jane Fish, at least she has some interaction with people, so it seems that she lives a less lonely existence compared with Iago, and we see that, doesn't it? Where don't we? Where she says, or where it's mentioned that men come from miles and bike from morn till night. At least she has this sort of passing traffic of people around her. So she gets these sort of new ideas coming in, even if you could still argue that it's still limited a little bit, like Iago, because they are her customers. So this interaction is based on a transaction rather than maybe something deeper that you'd expect to have with your friends, with your family. But then, it might extend just as far as just pleasantries, just like, just some pleasant sort of small talk. That's the phrase I was looking for. But in a peasant, we don't really have any indication of any other human beings. It's quite a lonely existence for Iago. His life as a hill farmer is lived just with his own company. The only company he has is the company of animals. And really, it's not really mentioned compared to perhaps a poem we talked about before, or the one that came up in the exam, that he doesn't really get a sense perhaps of companionship from these animals. They're just there to be looked after. Okay, moving on to what are the messages of the poem, okay? So really be clear, what's the big ideas that these poems are dealing with? And try to find this first. I would try to get that sort of common big idea between the two. Even just for your own planning, I would almost have that statement in my head first, that both poems deal with the idea of what? Now, if I was starting off with that sort of approach, in my head, I'm thinking that both poems deal with hard-working, honest people, yeah? Honest, hard-working people. And they're sort of quite working-class people who are at the heart of sort of traditional communities. Let's have a look at Auntie Jane Fish first, that she's hard work, and we get that, don't we, from the way that she drips female sweat and friendship. That you can almost see the level of her hard work in the way that she's sweating. It's really exaggerated, that use of hyperbole, but in almost like quite a comical way. She almost represents that the people we sometimes only see for what they do and not who they are. We only see Auntie Jane Fish for being this fishmonger, this seller of fish, and not a human being. So not behind her job in terms of her relationships at home, with her family, with her friends, that she's not, that just like us, we like to think that, say for you guys, you stop being a pupil maybe at 3:30, unless you've got homework, that is. And then you go home and you become someone slightly different, a different side of yourself, to your mum, your dad, your auntie, your uncle, your guardians, your friends, your sports coaches, whoever you interact with. You might be able to show a different side of yourself. The only side we're shown of Auntie Jane Fish is her professional side, the side of her that is her job. We could also argue that, however, another way to view it is that her job gives her identity. It gives her a sense of purpose, which is something really to be valued, isn't it? And there's not everyone that gets that, to experience that they get a sense of identity from their job. Okay, let's have a look perhaps at a similar way there we've got with sort of Iago, is that a similarity is that he is also he also represents a way of life, doesn't he? Auntie Jane Fish represented this way of life in the marketplace, being a seller, that she lived and breathed being the seller at this marketplace, working extremely long hours, wedded to a job. That is who she is. And it seems her personality is wrapped up in being able to sell fish, to being a loud person, just being someone that stands out, is a real character. And Iago does as well. He's a symbol, however. So the way he's presented in terms of a way of life is that he's the symbol of the life of a peasant, or of the peasantry, of those people that came from poor background, poor, not much. They might have a small holding, so a small bit of land, something, not a lot really to call their own. Very basic, simple life. So what's the way we sort of discussed there, which is similar to Auntie Jane, is that the way he's presenting his hard work in life is that he endures and struggles on despite the harsh environment that constantly assaults him. And you could say that's similar with Auntie Jane Fishreed, the way that she squats there, nodding her big head, that this is, it's a physically sort of demanding sort of role as well that she has, and obviously the fact that she drips female sweat, that it's difficult, isn't it? It's very physical, but maybe that physicality is far more emphasized, you could argue, in a peasant. You can find lots of examples of that, such as those dynamic verbs we talked about in the last videos, of chipping, churning, docking. Yeah, he's just very active all the time. You can imagine how hard that is as you're getting older. Okay, but we could say, let's talk about some differences then, in the way they're presented as these hardworking people. The way she comes across, that she's hardworking. Auntie Jane Fish she represents the people who live almost, they give life to a community. So this community of the marketplace, it sort of buzzes and thrives partly because of her loud voice, of her presence. Yeah. Now, I'd say that we don't really get that with Iago, do we? That Iago is not so much the life and the buzz of community. He represents almost this unseen life, this unseen sort of center or of the peasantry, like representing the whole of the peasantry, because we don't see people around him that he interacts with, yet we know that we have to think that he represents the lives of hundreds of these types of farmers that we usually wouldn't come across ourselves because of how remote and isolated they are. So he represents the heart of that community of farmers. Yeah. And the funny thing is that community is quite a spread out community that wouldn't perhaps interact because of the nature of their life, which is quite isolated and separate. But sort of what unites them, both Iago and Auntie Jane Fish, is that their honest labor and sort of even bold personalities. They still both stand out, don't they? They're people we almost can't ignore, whether it's Auntie Jane Fish's the fact that she stinks enough of fish to change the color of the light, that she stands out there. And in a similar way, almost the use of smell as well, is that, and how hard he's working and how almost his life doesn't change. Similar there with Auntie Jane Fish is Iago's, I'm just finding it in the poem, that his clothes sour with years of sweat and animal contact. So yeah, there's someone whose presence is very powerful and is linked to how hard they work, isn't it? I mean, they smell because they are constantly working, to the point that their clothes seem to be absolutely imprinted with the sweat of all the labor and work they've done. As a small thing, just to sort of finish off there, because I've gone over the 10 minutes, so apologies, Emily. But just finish off, so you've got the sort of links you can sort of make. I would say as well, I mean, Auntie Jane Fish is this loud character. Iago is this quieter character. I think Iago, in that respect, being a quieter character, he's not someone who perhaps we could easily recognize as someone to be appreciated, because he's a bit out of sight. He's tucked out of the way on the mountain. He's not a loud character, but he's no less impressive than Auntie Jane Fish, whose voice cuts through the crowd. And why is that? Right, he's got that same sort of nobility to his struggle in terms of Auntie Jane Fish. She's sort of there all through the day. She squats there. She's richly alive among the silvery dead. So she's constantly having to sort of work hard to draw a crowd in. But look how hard Iago has to work. His struggle against against nature, his environment, against the weather, that gains our respect, doesn't it? We can't help but admire him for that. While Iago seems to live on, and we could say she is described as richly alive amongst the silvery dead. That's another thing you could say, an idea that she lives, doesn't she? They both live, really. They live, and they live because the power of how they made impression on us as readers. They live on. She lives on in terms of, we can see her in the market. She's there every day. And Iago, his hard work sees him live on through, even after his death, to represent almost like that tree that stands there underneath the stars for years and years to come. As long as there's that tree there, underneath the stars. As long as the stars are there, as long as the mountain is there, it's almost like Iago is there as a marker to represent him and the sort of